For me, cinema is not merely a tool of storytelling. It's a kind of a tool wherein we end up with a discourse with the viewer. One thing that constantly I'm bothered about is how the people in our society make the people feel that they are other within the othering, the process of othering in the name of religion, in the name of democracy, in the name of development, in the name of community. The film, the Kannada version of Money, came 3 years prior to the globalization. Some of my very sensitive critics of my film, they said I am overreacting to the situation. They dismissed the film. Now, after 20 years, they say, you are right. We hadn't anticipated this. One thing which I admire in all my characters is their adaptability. Unlike some of my male characters, all my female characters, they adapt themselves.
You are actually chronicling the history of the nation. Like if I start from Ghatashraddha, then it comes down to Thai Saheba, then it comes to Dweepa, Mane, and then, Koormavatara. It's like how a nation is changing and how the people of the nation is also changing along with. That comes out as one single thread across your films.
It's not a conscious choice, but while making a film, I am constantly looking at what are the influences that is working on the time when I'm making it. When you are looking for it, naturally it chronicles the history of my nation.
Hello everyone, welcome to Filmcopath. Today as a guest, we have a pioneer of the alternate Indian cinema. Known in India and internationally for his compelling works, he has garnered 14 national awards in his career, including 4 Best Feature Film Awards. In 2011, he was awarded the Padma Shri, the 4th highest civilian award by Government of India. Today we have with us the honor of hosting Girish Kasaravalli sir and discuss his inspiring and thought-provoking works through decades. Girish sir, thank you so much for joining us today. We are extremely thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Sir, my first question to you is that you have always been someone who has taken up literature to be the source material of your cinema, like for most of it. Yeah. We wanted to understand what considerations do you have in mind when you take up a particular story or a novel for adaptations? How do you differentiate between, say, a great literary piece and a literary piece that would be great for cinematic adaptation?
In fact, most of my films are based on Kannada literature, not just the literature, Kannada literature. In fact, one of the reasons for me to join FTI to film fraternity is to convert the beautiful stories that I have read in Kannada into films. But after I joined FTI, my perception of cinema, perception of relationship between film and cinema, film and literature has changed drastically. That's when I realized not all great works can be a source material for great film, good film. So cinema needs a literary work which has certain qualities in it which can be adapted into film. When I pick up a story, the first concern, of course, since I make films in Canada, in India, first concern is that story should have a very dramatic appeal. In fact, in India, there are very few filmmakers who make films without a dramatic structure. So the film should emotionally move us. That's the first criterion. The second criterion is that would the story lend itself to the cinematic adaptation? When I say cinematic adaptation, we look for certain kind of elements in the story which lends itself to filmmaking. One thing it should we in cinema we narrate story through images. When I say images, what I mean is not just the visual images, but the oral images through editing, through other visual details. Will this particular story lend itself to this particular criterion? And third thing is that does it have any relevance? If I am making the film today, I look for some kind of a relevance. When I say relevance, it should either be talking to the social, political situation that is there in our midst, or else it should lift the story should lift our this one to a kind of a philosophical quest. So if it doesn't do that, then I won't take it up. So what happens is any good literature, that way it has all these elements. But the only thing that lacks is that we need to consider is, would it lend itself to cinematic adaptation? Because for me, cinema is not merely a tool of storytelling. It's a kind of a tool wherein we end up with a discourse with the viewer, with the cineast. When I say discourse, it's not merely the storytelling, it goes beyond the storytelling. That's exactly what I look for in a story.
And like, I have watched most of your films previously, in isolation for one festival or the other. But for this interview, when I was rewatching them back to back, what came out, sir, is you are actually chronicling the history of the nation. Like if I start from Ghatashraddha, then it comes down to Thai Saheba, then it comes to Deepa, Mane, and then Koormavatara. It's like how a nation is changing and how the people of the nation is also changing along with that, comes out as one single thread across your films.
In fact, it's not a conscious choice, but while making a film, I am constantly looking at what are the influences that is working on the day when on the time when I'm making films. When you are looking for it, naturally it chronicles the history of my nation, history of the humankind, and maybe it's too tall a climb, but in a way it chronicles the history of the nation and history of the what is happening, certain socio-political issues, certain kind of a concerns that bother me. So that's how it becomes a chronicler of time. The films, for me, I look at my films that way. All my films chronicle the era in which I am living.
Right. And again, as I was saying, we were watching your films back to back, rewatching. There's we've observed that there's very recurring, some few of the recurring motifs that keeps on coming in your film. So we wanted to talk to you about that. The first one I wanted to talk about is water. Like in Deepa, in Nine Eralu, then in Gulabi Talkies, water keeps on coming. They become a character in themselves. So what attracts you to that motif, sir?
In fact, I'm from a area called Malenadu, which means the hills, the land of hills. During my childhood days, one thing that constantly gave company to us was the rain. So rain has become a kind of a fascination for me. So also the water, the rivers, the pond, the lakes. So I have been using that as a metaphor for various things in all through my films. I wasn't very conscious of that till people pointed out. What happens, these images, they start coming to you from your memory, from your experience, and things like that, which we are not actually aware of. Right. I don't even realize that I'm going back to the same water, same river. I'm going back to the rain and things like that.
Right.
But there is another thing, that these are all visual details. But when you're talking about recurring themes, one theme that constantly I'm bothered about is how the people in our society make the people feel that they are other within the othering. The process of othering is one thing which is very it demeans the man, it weakens the man, it makes the being person, not man alone, women as well. And that's something which I have been dealing with all my films in the name of religion.
Itself.
Yeah, in the name of religion, in the name of democracy, in the name of development, in the name of community, discipline. See, in all these things, we make the man feel that he doesn't belong to this particular mainstream. He's the other man. So that is very, very painful to
Mm.
the
Of
individual,
course.
because the physical violence is something which one can always cope with, and within a day or two it heals up. But this process of making someone that you are not part of me, you are not part of us, you and us, you and me, it's very, very disturbing and very painful for the person who has been accused of being the other person.
Right. Right.
Social ostracization part of it.
Certainly, yes.
Sir, and just related to this, the second motive which we find is the motive of displacement that there's so many of your films. Like you talked about violence in the film in the form of uprooting the characters from the societal abode, be physically or metaphorically, starting from Ghatashraddha to Gulabi Talkies to Mane. Do you think displacing someone from the roots is the worst one human can inflict on the other?
Yeah, displacing make one feel that he is the other, is not wanted. In fact, one thing which bothers me all the time, we are all displaced. Actually, I am from a village and then we moved to Bangalore, and I found it very, very difficult for me for quite some time to get used to this space, this etiquette and things like that. Because we have certain different norms in villages, and we have different norms in Bangalore. We have different etiquettes, we have different social relations. And so displacement in one way is a method making one feel that he is not part of them. It is very evident in a film like in films like Dweepa and Gulabi Talkies. One is done in the name of development, in another it's the name of religion and community.
But what I found very interesting, kind of a subversion to this theme of displacement is in Nainaralu. Venku gets displaced, and it kind of brings a bit of comfort. Also, in your last film,
You mean neither be?
Illiralare, Alige,
Yeah.
Hogalare.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
They are also, in the two parts, what you do, in the first part, you show a displacement that happens for the character, puts him out of his, the way he was facing the caste and all. And in the second part, a boy of same age getting displaced from his family is having a very different experience. So you also do a lot of subversions around that displacement theme, right?
Yeah. Sometimes, it's then in my film Dweepa, wherein one of the characters says, "It's good." I mean, at one point, even Nagi, the protagonist, says, "I wish we are displaced." The
Yes,
landlord
yes.
lady asks her, "Why do you say that?" She says, "At least they would then look for a different kind of a, job, and instead of doing the same name puja and other things, because her husband is a performer, religious performer. She is fed up with that." So I'm not trying to say one act is totally repressive, the other is totally, kind of a releasing. No, it's not so. In fact, just imagine my case. If I had stayed back in my village, I would have been a simple farmer. But not that being a farmer is anything inferior, but probably for my persona, this is a better option. So, like that, you see, there are a lot of people who move to village to urban space to village, looking for some kind of a realization of self. And that, of course, as I say, any work of art, we are not trying to make a work of art just to prove our point. We also see the counterpoint. So that's when it becomes very complex. While I'm saying here are the situations which is oppressing them, I'm also bringing out some other characters who use the same space for a release.
Yes.
Like in Dweepa, there are other people, the landlord, for example, who has shifted after collecting the money and set up a shop. So he's quite happy with that. Whereas Nagi or Ganapa isn't. So it's not one cannot say, sir, about these developments in a very binary kind of divisions. Here is good, here is bad. Like
Even
Anantmurthy, the famous writer in Kannada, keeps saying, used to keep saying that we need to look at the any problem from all different sides. Then only it gives you the complete holistic view of what is happening. So there are certain strength, there are certain weaknesses. We need to. Otherwise, what happens? It becomes a kind of a argumentative. Like this is bad, this is good. But the work of in work of fiction, work of art, I think we should end up just arguing like a high school student student in a debate.
I mean, in this respect, I find a lot of similarity with even Satyajit Ray. Like, say for a Potter Pachali or say for a Oshuni Shankit, the displacement is happening and it is a crisis for the characters. But in Pratibandhi, the character is self going to a village from the city, and that is a relief for him.
Yeah, it's not exactly relief, but he finds a job there.
Yes.
He moves out of this very stifling Calcutta milieu to a place, a small village, wherein he gets a job, and where he could hear the bird.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not. It may not be his own choice, but then he finds pleasure in the new environment.
Yeah. Right.
So the other recurring theme which we find is the presence of Gandhi and Gandhian ideologies in your films. Of course, in Koormavatara, you deep dive into this theme, but even in your earlier films, Gandhi appears to come across as an inspiration. Are we right in thinking this way?
I haven't studied Gandhi in that sense, but what impressed me in Gandhian ideology is the way how he tries to accommodate opposing views. He wouldn't alienate people who oppose him, who disagreed with him. He wouldn't shut himself off for the counter perspective. That is something, which is very, very fascinating in Gandhi and this one. He never, even if somebody criticizes Gandhi, we have, in the history, we have seen a lot of people who do not agree with him. Even his own, like Nehru didn't agree with him, Rajaji didn't agree with him, Patel didn't agree with him. But then, he didn't shut them off. He didn't shove them off. On the other hand, he tries to understand their perspective, and that led to some kind of a negotiation of ideas. And there's nothing like hard and fast. This is good, this is bad. He would constantly, the man who said the traveling is not the right thing, but then you took up traveling to enhance his own experience. Man who was against machinery, but then he accepted that. So there are a lot of things, which his ideology, his perception kept on changing with the counter arguments. I would say that's a very positive strength. May not a lot of people may not agree with me because they might say Gandhi wasn't firm. And that is the argument which we hear these days. But I think that's one of the articles. I think Ashish Nandi mentioned this. It's a kind of a motherly attitude towards the changing thing. He won't reject it. He would accept it and then internalize it and makes his own. He would make it his own. So that is something which is very important for a person to evolve. Otherwise, one becomes very, very stagnant and very autocratic. And so, if you really believe in democracy, if you really believe in the this one of the human spirit, then we need to understand this from that kind of a perspective.
A very interesting thing in Thai Sahiba, I have noticed is, this character Appa Sahib, he is a follower of Congress, and he's lamenting on the death of Gandhi. So we think that he's coming from that kind of a ideology. And later he gets arrested, and one character says now he might be arrested because of communism. You might be communist as the state is thinking that he's arrested. So how you kind of merge that when you're standing for the right, you will always have irrespective of what ideology you follow, you'll always have that friction and that conflict which will keep on hitting you.
In fact, one of the one of the stands that Appa Sahib takes is that, to give away the lands to after we get the independence. He says now it's a time for us to set a society wherein you don't have this hierarchical order of feudalism. That's being opposed by all his colleagues who are with him during the freedom struggle, because now they are looking after their own, because they want to retain their feudal system, they want to retain their zamindari system and all that. So they suddenly, Appa Sahib, in their perception, Appa Sahib becomes a villain. They don't want Appa Sahib because he's such an important leader, but he is working against their interest. So that's why, they want him to get arrested. They want him to be arrested, and then they'll put the blame on his attitudes, healthy attitude, and blame him as a communist and arrest him. So there's this kind of a conflict right through the film. In the beginning, he was arrested because he's a Gandhian. Later, he's arrested because he's a communist. And probably, had he continued, they would have called him many other names.
Just, while talking about Gandhi, I'll just, get into a bit more details of Koormavatara. One striking aspect of the film for me is how you repeat that practice scene of the Gandhi shoot. Like this character keeps on, practicing that Namaste Bapu, and then he shoots. So is it your way of hinting that Gandhi had actually multiple deaths before he actually got shot?
In fact, when Gandhi, in the beginning, the film begins with a shooting of Gandhi, and when the Gandhi is shot, the actors who are playing other Congress leaders, they clap. Cinema suggests that Gandhi became a burden even to, the people who now have become ministers, leaders. That kind of a uprightness, they find it very difficult to tolerate. And so that's how the film ends. The actor says, "Please kill me, because I want to get rid of this conscience of being a Gandhian."
And also, sir, tell us, for real life, believing in these Gandhian philosophies and implementing in life, is it definitely to end up, alienating others around you, because it's very difficult to live up to those kind of ideologies for a group? Because what you show in one scene that, Gandhi is waiting, no one is along with him. That scene that Rao practices, that everyone has deserted, he's sitting alone and he should be feeling more sorrowful. And that's the kind of scene we see Rao also facing in his own life later, that everyone has deserted him. So do you think it's very difficult? It's not practically possible to take a group into that kind of a living?
In fact, one of the my concerns that prompted me to adopt this short story by Dr. Veerabhadrappa was that, the Gandhian ideology, I'm not talking about Gandhi, I'm talking about Gandhian ideology, all said and done, it has become a bit difficult for us to implement it, because we have moved away from the earlier system, and in the consumerist world, so it's become very difficult, because Gandhi, there's this old Gandhian in the film who says, we have reduced Gandhi to Khadi and Harijanodhar, but Gandhi also talked about the moral commitment of the individual. He says, if you're a doctor, you have a moral this one, and if you are a teacher, you have some moral obligation to do to the society. If you're a politician, if you're a leader, you have certain other things. So do we really follow that? When you ask this kind of questions, things become very complicated. And only Gandhi could have understood that, but I don't think anybody, and especially in the post-90s, 92, the globalization and things like that, where the consumerist ideology became the ideology of the society. I find it a bit difficult. This becomes very, very difficult to follow it up. So I raise that kind of question also in the film, because Gandhi himself in the film, the actor who plays Gandhi himself starts selling soap. He becomes, a kind of an actor who sells soaps.
Sir, is there any way the country could have escaped this consumerism or this opening up? Or is there? I think it was more or less inevitable. What do you think about that?
It's not just the country. The whole world couldn't escape from it. Today, the whole world, all over, so it's a consumerist society where the corporates rule the roost, and then politicians play tunes that pleases the corporate world. It's not a very healthy development. It's not a very happy development.
And the most remarkable part, sir, in your cinema is like when you did Ek Ghar, back then when it was just starting, the consumerism and industrialization was
Yes.
coming. I mean, you kind of visualized what happens in India today long back. I mean, 3-4 decades back. How did you get to feel that this is something which is coming, which everyone was not, kind of prepared for?
In fact, the Kannada version of the film was made in 1989.
Right.
The globalization was happened in 1992. So my film predicted the thing 3 years before. Two things prompted me. One is that when Rajiv Gandhi took over as the prime minister, one thing he said, let us jump to 21st century. The word he used was jump. Let's not progress to 20th. It's not a gradual jump. I was shocked because I thought suddenly when you jump, not all people can jump. So you are leaving behind certain, especially people from the village, people from the handicapped, people from the marginalized section of the society. You leave them behind. Doesn't create the bigger rift was my question. Second thing was, in 1998 or so, Dunkel Draft was available in even in my language. So I had read that and I was a bit shaken up by all the ideas that were propagated in that. I said, is it going to be a good thing, or it's going to support the whole development? So these are things which moved me. That time, nobody even anticipated that P.V.
Yes.
Narasimha is going to become the prime minister. Manmohan Singh will become the finance minister, and then the whole Indian society will get a shot in the arm, and then they jump to what Rajiv Gandhi imagined, visualized. So in that sense, yes, the film, the Kannada version of Manek, came 3 years prior to the globalization. And what I tell you one thing, some of my very sensitive critics of my film, they said I'm overreacting to the situation. They dismissed the film. Now, after 20 years, they say, you are right. We hadn't anticipated this. Because the film talks about the change in our value system. What is right and what is wrong. Because the moment you adopt consumerism, what becomes, whatever is profitable is the right thing. Only market-driven gets highlighted.
Sir, any specific reason you casted Nasruddin Shah, Deepti Nawal, Hindi cinema actors and made it bilingual?
No, what happened was, the answer is very simple. I wanted a slightly bigger budget because before Mane, I made a film called Tabarana Kathe, which was a very small budget. And I said with that, because of the small budget, I had to resort to 16 mm and the quality, the visual quality, the picture brilliance was never, I could never get the original one. So I said I wanted to shoot the 35 mm and I need slightly bigger budget with, because I had to shoot in corporate world and all that. They said, if you are making it in Canada, only this much is, we can give you only this much budget. So then why don't you do it in Hindi? So since I wanted a bigger budget, I accepted to do that in bilingual. And that's, I think, I really regret, because if I had stuck to Kannada actors, Kannada, this one, things would have been much better.
The other recurring motif that I wanted to talk about is the feminine solidarity that you have in your films. Like your female characters are very strong and they cover a lot of spectrum actually, and that's there. But it's also about how they bond. Like say the way Gulabi bonds with the neighbor who goes away, and there's a beautiful last scene near the end of the film. The way Rohini Hatangari's character and Dipti Naval bond scene. Mane. And the best one is, in Thai Sahiba, this wife and mistress bonding and they going together out of the manner, amazing. So when you write your scripts or consider your scripts, do you consciously make this woman bond and put them as a subtext?
No. I don't prefix anything. As I go on, working on the script, characters evolve, and I suddenly realize that bonding like this would probably make a thing, bring in new dimensions to the film. I tell you one thing, one thing which I admire in all my characters is their adaptability. Unlike some of my male characters, protagonists, especially that of Dweepa or of Gulabi Takis, all my female characters, they adapt themselves. It's a kind of a negotiation. They don't have their own, kind of an ego, which prevents them from negotiating or accepting other perspective. So that's one quality that I see in women, which I admire, and which gives them a lot of strength to them. As I was telling you earlier, Gandhi had picked up that element from the women, his mother, his wife, and a lot of other things. That is kind of thing which I always emulated. I wanted to use that in all my films. And as I went on working on the script, naturally all these elements came in and strengthened my character and the plot development.
About the performances in your films, sir. So, in quite a few of your films, you kind of keep the actors from performing, there's a kind of guarded approach to make them perform. Say like in Ghatashraddha, the way Meena reacts to across the film, it's not that she's not performing, but there's a kind of, I don't know how to put it, but there's a kind of railings or guardrails to how she does. But say for Deepa, when Saundarya is performing, there's a beautiful scene where there's an outburst and she cries, and she's, when one of the characters says Maya dies, she's crying. So for few films you have it differently, but few films it's like you let them be free. So how do you negotiate with the actors of how they will perform in a particular film?
In fact, I don't let any of my artists perform. I keep telling them, performing is not the element of filmmaking at all, film aesthetics at all. You just leave the role. So the great thing I learned from masters in the world cinema is that they let the character leave, let the artist leave the role, leave the character. L-E-A-V, leave. L-I-V, leave. So what happens is here people, many in our most of us, they leave the character, L-E-A-V, leave. They should leave the character so that as a viewer, I must get convinced that they are real. They are not performing. As a spectator, I also get convinced, could relate to the character because they look real. Their emotions are real. Their attire is real. Their walking is real. So nothing should make the viewer feel. None of these elements should make the viewer feel that it's slightly artificial. In fact, in one kind of filmmaking, the artificiality is the strength of the film. No, I work other way around. I want them to get rooted to the milieu in which the characters are rooted. When I insist on this, I keep telling them, don't act. You just say the words, and the rest of the things, camera does it. Camera is there. See, in a way, in cinema, the acting, the performance, the build-up, everything is synthesized through camera.
Mm.
When I say synthesis, not just editing alone, but there are camera, there are sound recording, there are music. So one has to take that into consideration. The ideas do not come from acting alone. Ideas come from sound, ideas come from composition, ideas come from music, movement, mise en scene. So one need to understand this, and I tell my artist not to perform.
Right, right. The other things are, I would not say it's a motive, but I think what I have observed is a narrative style is the way the last 5 minutes of your film. I mean, they mostly devastate. You keep the best for that last 5 minutes, the end part, be through dialogue, be through, shots, or be through what the convergence happens for the story. So, this ending. So, when you are working on the script, you think about this ending and then build up to it, or you are actually, as it progresses, the ending kind of organically comes the way it is, and they are all magnificent.
There are a lot of elements which come into play when one is writing the script. And as I told you in the beginning itself, since in India, most of us will have a kind of a, what is it called? A kind of a resolution, a climax towards the end and then the resolution. And I follow that kind of construction, which is quite old, which is very classical construction, I know. But then I cannot keeping, because I don't want to, cater to my own people. I retain that structure. And so all the elements of filmmaking move towards that. And that is one of the reasons why I think the films, the climax or the ending or the kind of a dramaturgy, is consolidated, and that all the mise en scene, acting, everything moves, works towards that end.
It's also kind of a loop, like, say, for money, the first scene, Nasiruddin Shah says that I belong to this company, S&W. And in the last scene, we see that S&W bulldozer comes. Or say in Thai Saheba, the first scene we see police is coming to arrest. And in the last scene, police is coming to arrest Narmada. So beautifully completes the whole loop and the universe of that film, the way the endings happen in your cinema.
Yeah, there are certain things, wherein I try to bring in a kind of a cyclical motif. Even in Ghatashraddha, towards the end, that old man, 80 years old man, is planning to marry a 16-year girl, implying that, another Yamunaka is getting made. And that kind of thing happens in all my films, somewhere to say that not in all my films, certain films, because that goes with the theme itself. Not to say that everything has been solved, everything is free now, everything. It's not. It doesn't. In reality, life doesn't move like that. So I just want to repeat these kind of things. It's there in it's there in Thai Saiba. It's there in of course in Ghatashraddha also in another sense. Mm-hmm.
So, and then there are also cases where we have changed the endings from what there were in the story, like in the Dweepa or Mane. If you tell us why you wanted to do that and what the writers of the original text thought about those changes which you made.
One accusation against me, not accusation, I kind of say kind of adoration, is that I don't stick to the original story at all. None of my films resemble the original short story or original novel on which they are based. Best deviations are probably Thai Saheba, Nine Erdo, Gulabi Talkies. Totally different. And even to some extent, Koormavatara, they're quite different from the original story. But I am very fortunate because all my writers are very, very happy with whatever I have done. And they agree that it's still, I keep telling them, though there are a lot of deviations, I got the inspiration, I got all these ideas after reading your story. So I want to acknowledge it, and then I acknowledge and they're all quite happy about it. Because you see, I believe in one thing, if you verbatim, if you translate it into cinema, then where is this insight came to me in my first film itself, after watching the film, Anand Purti said, I am very happy with the film because the story, the film deviates a lot from the original short story. Just imagine a writer to say this. He says, I liked it because it deviates from the story. The reason he quoted was, I could read the story in, say, for 20 minutes. Why should I waste 2.5 hours or 2 hours to cinematic adaptation? If you don't make any changes, don't have any interest or reason to watch the film. See, the thing here is there are two things. One is that I make a lot of changes, and so one can purely view the film as an independent work of art. So, second thing is that it can be seen for its intertextual relations. How was the story and how was the film? Why are these changes? And that is what is fascinating to me, and I would like to make a lot of changes with the original story because of that. Otherwise, I'll just be repeating whatever the writer is saying. And as Anand Purti rightly said, Dr. Anand Purti said, what is the point in just supplementing the visuals for the words?
Sir, if we ask you, I know it's might be a silly one, but if we ask you, which one do you consider your most accomplished film? Which one you would not like to change at all or be as exactly it is?
I don't want to review my film at all. Once it's done, it's done. I don't want to think about it again. But a lot of my friends think Ghatashraddha is my best film. There are other filmmakers who think Thai Saiba is equally interesting. There are a lot of friends who think three of my last films, been greater contribution, like Gulabi Takis, Koormavatara, and there is another the film which I also like very much called Kana Sembo Kudreyaneri, Riding the Stallion of Dream, the grave digger, where the narrative goes back and forth all the time. I like, if you look at my film, that is one film which has got me a lot of international awards, awards, and these are all. A lot of people find Koormavatara because of its relevance. A lot of people find Gulabi Takis because its relevance. It's a kind of social, insights. So I am quite detached from all these things. Sometimes, when I sit with the audience, the truth of my films, which get a lot of audience appreciation, are Tabarana Kathe and Dweepa.
Yes.
I'm not all that, I don't get carried away because of the audience reaction, but I'm happy that people find it very fascinating, especially Dweepa. A lot of people say because of its ensemble character. I think that's one film of mine which is where the photography is good, sound design is good, music is good, acting is good, setting is good. Maybe that is one of the reasons why people like it. I have my own preferences. I have my own likes and dislikes, even about my film as well as the films of any masters. Many a times, one of the universally accepted film, I don't agree with it. Like the Tokyo Story of Ozu. My favorite Ozu is not Tokyo Story, but Autumn Afternoon. I would say it's one of the finest films made, but not the kind of a slight sentimentalism that is there in Tokyo Story is never there in this. But yet, the kind of insight the character Ozu gives into characters are something amazing in Autumn Afternoon.
So many people keep on saying that you are so inspired by Ozu. In a lot of reviews that I've come across, they keep on saying, there's a lot of Ozu inspiration.
It's not true. In that sense, I'm not really. I like Ozu. So I make this distinction. There are people whose works, I like. One such person is Ozu. The other such person is Kurosawa. So you don't see anything of Kurosawa in my film, or Bergman for that film in my film. So because I keep saying that I like Ozu, they think,
influence,
which is not true. You see, what happens, you even if you look at some of the very, very important filmmakers, what they like and what they produce are totally different. I'm no different either. I have heard a lot of people saying, their favorite filmmaker is Wozu. Some of the very top American filmmakers, top European filmmakers, but I don't see any bit tinge of Wozu in their works.
So, and I want to ask you a few questions about Kannada cinema overall. I think in the 79 Chennai Film Festival, Satyajit Ray had mentioned that the future of Indian cinema lies in Kannada cinema, probably after seeing your, I think, Ghatashraddha. And do you believe that Kannada cinema has been able to live up to that expectation?
In fact, when Satyajit Ray made that statement, we had a very good lineage. It all started with, say, Samskara, one of the finest films made in, not just in Kannada, in India itself. Followed it by Girish Kasaravalli's Kadu, B.V. Karan's Chomanadudi, and few more such films. And then came Ghatashraddha. So it's, when Satyajit Ray saw the film, then suddenly, well, within 4 years, they have made so many interesting films. So he said, future of Indian cinema lies in Kannada cinema. Unfortunately, we didn't live up to his predictions because what happened, there are a lot of other changes. The color eras, black and white was over, and we were all making in black and white film in a very small budget. And, we had to make, films in bigger budgets. And the state subsidy was not enough to sustain this movement, and the audience attention also dwindled. The press also became slightly antagonistic to this kind of thing. There are a lot of other things, and Kannada mainstream cinema somehow never accepted this. There are other reasons for that. And as a result, a lot of people migrated to greener pastures. Some of them started making very, very popular blockbusters, and they were quite successful also. Very few, not even handful, just 3-4 people stayed back in this kind of alternate cinema, and that was a sad development. Yes.
Sir, what about contemporary Kannada cinema? Any particular filmmaker that you're impressed with? Any particular cinema that you liked?
No. See, in all other cinematic film this one, Kannada industry too has two kind of filmmaking. One is popular genre, the other is somewhat experimental. I'm not very familiar with the popular genre of anywhere, whether it is Hollywood or Bollywood or Indian or Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam. I'm not very familiar with what is happening there. But in Kannada, of course, quite a few youngsters are making quite interesting films, and they're trying to break in new path, new style and things like that. It's very well. It's happening even in other languages in India, which is why I'm very optimistic about the younger generation coming out with brilliant works. In 60s or 70s, it was limited to few people. There was one Roy, there was one Mrinal Sen, there was one Shyam Benegal, or one Durgopala Krishnan Arvindan. But today you have a lot of youngsters making different kind of films. They probably make 1 or 2 films, then they disappear or they switch over to mainstream cinema. But at least they are making they're starting their career with a very, very promising films, and which is quite kind of a happy reason for me.
Sir, did you have any chance to watch Ram Reddy's Tithi or Rakshit Shetty's Uludavaru Kandante? Because those are 2 films, they are very, by the critics or by the masses, they have been equally appreciated. If I talk about the last 10 years of Kannada cinema.
I have seen both the films. I have also seen many other films which are quite interesting. Ram Reddy film is quite path-breaking because it's the use of idiom was was something which was not familiar to Kannada audience, but was not familiar even to Indian audience. which is you know it was possible because the new age cinema has come in, and it changed the perception of many of the filmmakers about our kinds of cinema, our kinds of looking at reality, our idiom, our cinematic notions of cinema. Well, that way it's fascinating, yes.
And Uludavare Kannate, did you like it?
Ulidarakannante, I liked it for its very complex narrative. I've given an extensive interview about the complex narrative of the film. There are also other films which I have find very interesting, and like the recent one, Pedro. Uh,
Yes.
Quite an interesting. There is another film by my daughter called Harikatha Prasanga, which is very fascinating. And there are also a lot of youngsters who are, you can make out that they are trying to do something different. Some of them have failed, some of them have succeeded. It's happened not, but it's not as vibrant as the Marathi cinema right now. But it's not as hopeless as some other film also. There are still experiments being done. They're still trying to do interesting films. Not seen some of the films like Bale Kempa by Iregowda, which has
Yes. Yes.
got rave reviews in when it was shown in Rotterdam, but I have not seen it yet. It couldn't be seen. I couldn't. It wasn't shown here.
And sir, if we talk about Indian cinema, like we asked Adur Gopalakrishnan sir that whom do you consider the most, influential and promising filmmaker, after you, after you have started. And he mentioned you. He said that it has to be Girish Kasaravalli. If we ask you the same question, so considering Indian cinema as a whole, do you think who is this person whom we should look up to?
I'm really grateful. I'm very thankful to Adur Gopalakrishnan for making such comment. But there are few filmmakers whom I admired in Indian cinema. Satyajit Roy, Mrinal Sen, and Adur Gopalakrishnan remain my favorite. And what is happening now is there are a lot of youngsters who are making interesting. So I'm very eagerly awaiting for the second film.
Okay, yes.
Good way. Because you see what happens, when they make the first film, we come there with the full energy, and then they try to do something quite totally different. There are certain very people who made very interesting first film, making a lot of compromises in their later films. So I only wish these filmmakers do not fall into that trap.
Sir, thank you so much, and this was such an enlightening discussion and such a crisp discussion, and we are so very happy that this could happen, and really we are thankful to you from the bottom of our hearts.